The streets of Manhattan glittered under the warm glow of street lamps, the air carrying that unmistakable mix of roasted chestnuts from a nearby cart and the faint scent of rain from an earlier drizzle. The city was alive, as it always was on theater nights, cabs pulling up to curbs, heels clicking against wet pavement, voices rising in laughter and excitement. The Lyric Stage Theater stood like a jewel in the middle of the block, its ornate facade lit by gold uplights, the carved details in the stonework casting dramatic shadows. Above the entrance, the massive marquee beamed proudly. World Premiere, The Winter Garden, written by Evelyn Carter. The red carpet stretched from the revolving glass doors to the edge of the sidewalk, bordered by velvet ropes and brass stanchions. Photographers jostled for position near the step and repeat backdrop, their cameras flashing as well-dressed guests stopped to pose. From the edge of the crowd, Marcus Ellison approached, tall, broad-shouldered, and in his early 30s, Marcus carried himself with an easy grace. His dark wool coat was tailored but understated, worn over a crisp black shirt and dark trousers. In one hand, he carried a slim black envelope, the kind that bespoke a private, high-level invitation. His eyes swept the scene, taking in the glint of jewelry on arriving guests, the faint whiff of expensive perfume that lingered in the air. He paused briefly at the edge of the velvet rope, glancing at the illuminated theater doors ahead. A faint smile touched his lips. Not one of vanity, but of quiet anticipation. This wasn't just another night out. The play opening tonight wasn't simply a cultural event for him. It was personal. Marcus adjusted the envelope in his hand, stepping toward the roped-off entrance where guests were being checked in. The rhythmic flash of cameras behind him seemed to fade as he focused on the entrance ahead. He knew most people here had no idea who he was, and he was fine with that. For now. Frank Doyle stood at his post just inside the velvet rope, his stance wide, his hands clasped in front of him. A thick-necked man in his late 40s, he wore the standard black blazer and earpiece of the theater's security staff, the cord running discreetly down into his collar. His eyes scanned the incoming crowd with the brisk efficiency of someone who had worked 1,000 events like this. Frank liked order. He liked spotting potential problems before they happened. And tonight, in his mind, he had just spotted one. Marcus Ellison stepped forward toward the rope, the black envelope still in hand. From Frank's perspective, the man didn't quite fit the mental picture he had of this crowd. No tuxedo, no visible designer cufflinks, no flash of a recognizable VIP badge clipped to his coat. Just that plain dark overcoat, tailored, yes, but understated, and a confident stride that seemed to Frank just a little too self-assured. Frank's eyes narrowed slightly. He had worked enough of these events to know there were always people who tried it, slipping past with fake invites, hoping to blend in. "Evening," Frank said, his tone polite but flat, one eyebrow lifting slightly as he looked Marcus up and down. "Invitation, please." Marcus nodded and extended the envelope without hesitation. Frank took it, his eyes flicking to the embossed lettering and the signature inside. He didn't study it for long before glancing back up at Marcus. "You know, these things are pretty easy to fake. We've had a few tonight already." Marcus's expression didn't change. "It's genuine." Frank shifted his weight, subtly stepping so his body blocked the path to the entrance. "And who exactly are you here to see? Friends in the cast?" The question hung in the air for a second too long, drawing faint glances from two guests waiting just behind Marcus. One of them adjusted his bow tie, pretending not to listen, but his eyes flickered with curiosity. Marcus answered evenly, "I'm here for the premiere." Frank gave a small, non-committal grunt. "Right. Well, this is a private red carpet, sir. VIP access only." His emphasis on VIP was slight but deliberate. "So, if you don't have official credentials on you, I'm going to have to—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The implication was already there, and so was the line in the sand. The warm lights of the theater glowed just beyond Frank's shoulder, but for the moment, they might as well have been miles away. The glow from the theater entrance spilled onto the sidewalk, warm and inviting. But between Marcus and those glass doors stood Frank Doyle, shoulders squared, jaw set. Marcus held the black invitation steady in his hand, its thick cardstock catching the light. "This should be all the credentials you need," he said, his voice even but with an undertone of steel. Frank didn't take the card back. Instead, he gave it a cursory glance, as if its authenticity didn't matter. "Look, like I told you, these can be faked. You'd be surprised how many clever print shops there are in this city." Marcus's gaze didn't waver. "Are you implying this one's fake?" Frank gave a shrug that was both casual and dismissive. "I'm saying I can't just let anyone stroll up the carpet with a fancy piece of paper. This premiere's got a lot of important people, press, investors, celebrities. We can't have distractions." The pause before that last word carried a weight that didn't go unnoticed by Marcus, or by the people around them. A couple in their 60s, waiting behind him in line, exchanged a glance. Another man in a sharp tux shifted uncomfortably, clearly listening while pretending to scroll his phone. Marcus kept his tone calm, almost conversational. "Distractions? I'm here as a guest. You've seen my invitation. Why are we still having this conversation?" Frank stepped slightly to the side, but kept one arm extended, his palm open, like a barrier. "Because until I verify your name on the official VIP list, you're not getting past this rope. Step aside, please. Let the paying guests through." The phrase "paying guests" hung in the air like a challenge. A faint murmur rose from the queue as another cluster of arrivals waited behind them. Cameras from the red carpet flashed in the background, illuminating the scene in quick staccato bursts of white light. The whole world beyond Frank's shoulder was moving forward, but Marcus was being told to stand still. Marcus exhaled slowly, the kind of breath someone takes when they're deciding between letting something go and drawing a hard line. His hand tightened slightly on the envelope, but he didn't move aside. "Your call," Marcus said quietly. "But I'd think twice before you make the wrong one." Frank's lips pressed into a thin line. "Step aside." And just like that, the rope might as well have been a wall. The crisp autumn air seemed to grow sharper, the glow from the marquee casting long shadows over the red carpet. The muffled hum of conversation from the theater entrance was now overlaid with the soft, curious murmurs of those waiting in line behind Marcus. Marcus Ellison stood still at the velvet rope, his tall frame steady, his expression calm but resolute. He wasn't raising his voice, wasn't gesturing wildly, but the tension radiating from the space between him and Frank Doyle was thick enough to feel. Frank's stance was unyielding, one arm still outstretched in a silent barrier, his palm just inches from Marcus's chest. The invitation Marcus held might as well have been invisible. Frank's eyes weren't on it anymore. They were locked on Marcus, guarded and challenging. "You're holding up the line," Frank said, his tone low but edged with irritation. "I'm standing in the place your rope and my invitation entitle me to stand," Marcus replied, his voice even, controlled. That drew a few raised eyebrows from onlookers. One young woman in a green evening gown leaned subtly toward her date, whispering something that made him glance up from his phone. Frank shifted his weight, his patience thinning. "Sir, this is not the time or place to cause a scene." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "A scene? I haven't raised my voice. I haven't moved forward without permission. The only scene here is the one you're making by refusing to let me enter." From further down the line, a camera flash burst, and for an instant, the light caught Marcus's face. Calm, confident, but with the quiet burn of someone unaccustomed to being underestimated. Frank took a half step closer, lowering his voice so it was just above a whisper. "Look, I'm just doing my job. If you step aside, I'll get this sorted without making it uncomfortable for either of us." Marcus's eyes didn't waver. "You mean, without making it uncomfortable for you?" The exchange was short, but the bite in Marcus's words drew a faint ripple through the queue. People were no longer pretending not to watch. Heads were angled toward them, expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. Somewhere behind the theater doors, the muffled sound of applause filtered out from a pre-show reception. The warmth and welcome of the event inside stood in sharp contrast to the cold, tense line outside. And then, just as Frank opened his mouth to speak again, a new voice cut across the air from the entrance. A voice that would change everything. The rich, velvety sound of the theater's revolving glass doors turning broke the moment like a pin to a balloon. A figure emerged from the golden light inside. Evelyn Carter, the playwright whose name was emblazoned on the glowing marquee above. She was in her late 50s, her short silver hair styled in elegant waves, the deep green of her silk evening gown shimmering with each step. Around her neck hung a simple diamond pendant that caught the light as she moved. She paused at the top of the short set of stairs, leading to the red carpet, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. Her eyes landed on Marcus instantly, as if she had been looking for him from the moment she stepped outside. A slow, unmistakable smile spread across her face. "Marcus," she called, her voice rich and warm, carrying easily over the murmuring crowd. Heads turned, whispers started, and a ripple of recognition moved through those who knew who Evelyn Carter was. Marcus's posture didn't change much, but the flicker of warmth in his eyes was noticeable. He stepped half a pace forward as Evelyn descended the stairs with surprising swiftness for someone in heels. By the time she reached the bottom, she was already extending her arms. She drew him into a brief but heartfelt embrace, the kind that spoke of years of closeness. The scent of her perfume, subtle jasmine and something woodsy, lingered faintly in the cool night air. Pulling back, she kept one hand on his shoulder, turning slightly to look toward Frank Doyle. "I was wondering where you were," she said to Marcus, with affectionate exasperation. "I thought maybe you'd been swept away by the press." Frank's brow furrowed. His body shifted slightly, but his arm was no longer blocking Marcus. His eyes darted between the two of them, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Evelyn's smile toward Marcus widened, and she gave his shoulder a light squeeze before turning fully toward Frank. "I trust you've been taking good care of my guest?" Frank opened his mouth, but whatever answer he was going to give was interrupted by the faint hum of the crowd, which had grown louder. People were now openly watching, some with the wide-eyed interest of those sensing drama, others with polite curiosity. Marcus said nothing yet. He didn't need to. The dynamic had shifted the moment Evelyn had stepped outside, and Frank could feel it. Evelyn Carter's hand remained resting lightly on Marcus's shoulder as she turned to face Frank Doyle. Her expression was still pleasant, but there was a firmness in her gaze now, a subtle shift from the warmth she had shown Marcus just moments before. "Frank, isn't it?" she said, her voice calm but carrying easily over the murmur of the onlookers. "Yes, ma'am," Frank replied quickly, his posture stiffening. "I'm curious," she continued, tilting her head slightly, "why exactly my son was standing outside the theater instead of being ushered straight in." For a moment, the street seemed to go silent. Even the clicking of cameras on the red carpet slowed as reporters strained to hear. The crowd's whispers turned into audible gasps at that single word. "Son." Frank blinked. "Your son?" Evelyn nodded, her eyes unwavering. "Yes, Marcus Ellison, my only child. And, as it happens, the lead investor in this entire production." She gestured toward the glowing marquee above them. "Without him, there would be no Winter Garden tonight. Not for you, not for me, not for anyone here." The air seemed to thicken with the weight of the revelation. Frank's mouth opened, then closed again. His eyes darted to Marcus, who met his gaze with quiet composure, and then back to Evelyn. "I didn't realize—" "No," Evelyn interrupted gently but firmly. "You didn't. You didn't realize who he was because you didn't bother to ask. Instead, you made assumptions about who did and did not belong here." Around them, several people shifted uncomfortably. A woman in a black cocktail dress whispered something to her companion, who gave a knowing nod. The man in the tux from earlier kept his gaze fixed firmly ahead, as if trying not to be caught listening. Evelyn's tone softened, but the steel beneath it remained. "Frank, Marcus isn't just welcome here. He is integral to tonight. He's the reason those doors are open, the reason the press is here, the reason we're all celebrating." She turned back to Marcus, her expression warming instantly. "And I, for one, am honored he's chosen to be part of this journey with me." Marcus inclined his head slightly, his eyes glinting with a mix of humility and satisfaction. He still hadn't raised his voice once. Frank, on the other hand, was pale under the warm light of the marquee. I'm very sorry, sir. I didn't. Evelyn lifted a hand. Apologies later. Right now, we have a premiere to attend. The tension at the entrance seemed to dissolve the moment Evelyn Carter stepped back toward the red carpet, her hand still resting lightly on Marcus's arm. The velvet rope was unhooked without a word, and the path into the theater opened wide before them. Marcus stepped forward at her side, his stride unhurried, his chin lifted just enough to meet the curious eyes that followed him. The crowd's earlier whispers had shifted in tone, no longer questioning why he was there, but murmuring in surprise and, for some, embarrassment. A few people smiled at him now as he passed. One man, who had been silently watching from the back of the line, gave a small nod of acknowledgement. The cameras began flashing again, but this time they weren't just aimed at Evelyn. They caught Marcus as well. Photographers called out politely, "Over here, sir! One for the press!" Marcus paused briefly for a shot, his expression calm, collected, and unreadable. Behind them, Frank Doyle remained at his post, though his rigid stance had softened into something more uncertain. His eyes followed Marcus and Evelyn until they disappeared through the golden-lit doors. He shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his earpiece as the reality of the moment replayed in his mind. He'd been doing security for nearly 20 years, but he knew he'd remember this night. Not because a high-profile guest had shown up, not even because he'd embarrassed himself in front of the playwright, but because he'd been reminded, in the most public way possible, of how quickly and unfairly a snap judgment can be made. Inside the theater, Marcus was greeted like family. Members of the cast, still in partial costume, crossed the lobby to shake his hand. The producer clasped him on the shoulder and thanked him again for making the show possible. Evelyn beamed at him, introducing him to journalists and critics as "my son," and the man who believed in this play before anyone else did. Marcus accepted the praise with the same quiet grace he'd shown outside, but every now and then, his gaze flicked toward the glass doors, as if he could still feel the lingering shadow of the confrontation at the rope. He didn't dwell on it. Tonight wasn't about that moment. Tonight was about the story on stage, and about the people who had worked to bring it to life. Still, as the house lights began to dim and the opening notes of the overture swelled through the theater, there was one truth hanging in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Everyone who had witnessed that scene outside would think twice the next time they decided who looked like they belonged.